All right, so if you have questions, please raise your hand, and Cynthia or Sydney will come to you. Please speak in the mic so that we can hear you for the recording.
Hi, thanks so much. Hello? Now?
Testing, testing.
Thank you. Thanks for these presentations. This is such a robust tool. It's very interesting to think about. I have two questions. The first is whether size of paper is reflected in the data, whether that was recorded information. And the second one is something that I think some of the questions already have been touching about potential biases in the collection. Like if you know, so black and white rather than color is one thing that was mentioned. Is there a tendency towards Belgian and British papers, for example, or what other kinds of questions about like representativeness, I suppose, of the collection as a whole? Thank you.
You want to do the first one? I can do the second one.
Okay. Am I audible here? Okay. So are the sizes? So do you mean height and width? Well, no. Because, and I talk about this in a later talk. The reason we focus on thickness is it's because it's a fixed dimension of spatial extent that doesn't change. Artists can cut up the papers and stuff. So, and I mean, a lot of times when we get a package, most of them are 8x10s. I mean, it's not always true, especially older ones, you get smaller, but we found that to not be something that you can really use to distinguish paper samples because they can just be used at any size. So now we do a lot of collection analysis of actual artworks, and there we record height and width, and sometimes that becomes analytically interesting. I know that that's something maybe happening with the Mapplethorpe or data, things like that. So that does turn up sometimes. I think Paul originally viewed thickness as a little bit of a proxy for just overall size. But again, yeah, it would be hard to track that. I mean, although it is true, I mean, now that I'm thinking of it, that the packages of paper, they are of a certain size, but we felt that would.
Yeah, and I'll just say that you can, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. You can hear this, or you can find this information if you look at the packages. If you look at the package images, it will give you the dimensions of each paper. That's probably not the easiest way to find things, but the information should be legible there.
And so we do record that data if it's 5x7 or 8x10. So we have that data. It's just not. We didn't think it was so salient for Paperbase necessarily. However, we've done prior studies trying to figure out what are the sort of de facto standard sizes of paper, like 8x10, for example. There was never a ISO, standard for, dimensions of paper, but you start to see certain dimensions over and over again. And that becomes important when you start looking at collections. I'm not sure if we'll touch on this point, but one of the things that we looked at with Man Ray, for example, the example presented by colleagues from the Met a little later, was whether he was trimming his prints or not. And you can tell that, by comparing his dimensions relative to what was standard. So it does become an interesting thing. The dimensions become interesting when it comes to thinking about process. On a case-by-case basis. And then in terms of bias, I mean, we tend to think of, I sometimes describe the collection as a genome. It's really more of, I guess, of a phenome in that I think we have if we don't have the roughest, it's not a complete collection, that's for sure. We think of it as encyclopedic. So if we don't have the roughest texture, we have close to the roughest textures. We don't have the smoothest, we probably have as smooth as possible. So these, as engineering attributes, I think we cover the universe. We know what that expressive universe is. At least we think we do. Now, do we have every example in between? No. And what are we missing? The collection reflects where I was buying papers, or papers that were available to me. So they're principally North American, Western Europe, and Central Europe. I would love to do more and more broadly. Moving into Polaroid would be a great thing, but more regionally as well. And honestly, it doesn't have to be here. It doesn't have to be part of this collection. I think we've created a really great model for other reference collections that are independent but are working with, working to add to this data set.
Thank you so much for this really great comprehensive database. I was wondering, with paper thickness in recent COVID, we know there are problems with supply chain, and we have some major historical supply chains in the database, which is World War I, World War II. And then also in the late 90s, we start seeing the introduction of papers from Central Europe, which the quality control was not at the same level as AGFA and Kodak were in the United States. And I'm wondering how you're dealing with that measuring of thickness where the paper thickness could actually vary, and is there some other way of determining consistency across those?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about repeatability or in that context? So, I mean, are you saying that with an individual sheet of paper, you could have various thicknesses across the plane of the sheet? No, from package to package to, yeah. We don't really, so we're measuring absolute values, right? And so if you take a brand of paper that you suspect, or a manufacturer that you suspect maybe had good quality controls or not, or they were, sourcing their base paper from, different manufacturers and all of that, you could look at that. It wouldn't tell you specifically, oh, this is a different batch, but you would have to, you would be able to distinguish, these are thinner, these are thicker, just in the data. So Cappy's example of cotobromide, we could look at cotobromide. Was it cotobromide?
Yeah.
It was cotobromide.
Yeah.
We could look at cotobromide through the history of Kodak's manufacture of cotobromide, and we can chart the thickness variance if there is one.
Yeah, what you'd want to do is, you could start filtering. You get manufacturer, you get brand, maybe a year. You narrow the years, so you're getting and we may have multiple examples of things. Sometimes we'll have something in a sample book that we also have a package of. And then you can look at where they sit in the histogram once and so it's doable. Yeah, but there's no guarantee of any particular paper that we're going to have enough examples to really get a good estimate of the variance.
Right, I think that's right.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you guys for that. Really, all those talks were really super, super interesting. I have a ton of questions. I'll try to keep it short. So the first one is, this is a amazing resource, Paperbase. How will it be sort of maintained over time? Is there a longevity? Can we count on this? It's going to take a while to learn how to use it. First question. Second question, are you going to be adding papers to it over time? And yeah, I'll save my last question for later.
Yeah.
I have to answer. Leanne coming in with that hard question. Yeah, okay. Well, so the app should always work. I mean, I think that it was extremely well written, the app. So it's never gonna break. No. It'll always be up. I mean, the maintenance costs of it are almost nothing. We don't, there's no back-end server, and that's where you incur a lot of costs for hosting. There's nothing like that. This app runs on your machine, not in the cloud on a server. This is a completely client-side app. Okay, whatever, that's a nerdy detail, but the reason that's important is that we don't have to keep spending money to maintain it. There's just a bucket somewhere on Amazon's system that is holding a few files. It's basically free to keep this thing up. So it'll stay up. Now, depending on what happens with the lab, we don't know. I think what'll be harder is changing it over time. I think that it will be persistent over time. Continually updating, that'll be tougher. And we're not currently really accessioning lots of new papers either. So there's not a lot in terms of that. I would think for the next 6 or 9 months or something, if there's some really cool feature, like maybe adding the dimensions that Monica mentioned, now that I think of it, maybe that actually would be something that'd be neat to have filterable. There could be minor modifications to like how it works and stuff like that. Long term, yeah, it's a little unclear. And then I don't know if you want to say anything about the
And I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm sorry.
Your papers come from North America and most of the Western and Eastern Europe. Do you have translations? All your search terms, cream, thick, thin, expressive, was there any translation into English?
Yes. So mostly the manufacturers would translate. So if you're making a paper in, in Romania, whatever, you would put English, Italian, German on the package, and so we're taking those words straight off the package. In some cases, when that's not clear, then I'm doing the translation myself. And we've tried to buff out some of the variances that we see. There's many ways to write down mat. It's M-A-T in some, M-A-T-T-E, M-A-T-T. For our application, so we don't have a million ways to look at mat, it's spelled M-A-T-T-E, so there's a little bit of license taken there, but we do try to be incredibly faithful to what the manufacturer describes. So if they're saying, cream white, we don't compress that into cream, for example. There's all kinds of other really crazy names that come up, like super white, W-I-T-E. We keep that. We don't translate that.
All right, and unfortunately, I think that's going to have to be our last question. We're going to now take a slightly shorter break, and then we'll come back at 11 for our next panel. Thank you, everyone.